Welcome to the first installment of Fact Checkin BTB. I'm your host, Matt P. Jazz. I'm just bringing the show to you guys as a little bit of a test, but also something that I think I want to do moving forward because I love the Below the Belt show. And there might be some hate out there for that, but I enjoy it. The guy, he knows how to talk and he has a really good following, which is why he's able to do what he's doing full time. So, on a week-to-week basis, I listen to his show. I enjoy it. The only issue I have with it every now and then, he gets his facts wrong, and it kind of irks me. I don't know if it's because I have OCD or what it is, but it really irritates me when he gets certain things wrong. And sometimes Chin, or I think his producer's name is Nick, I think what his name is. I might have to get fact checked on that. But sometimes they just don't jump in and say, okay, that was wrong, or this was wrong, or this is what it actually is. And it makes for Schaub to go on these rants that are kind of pointless and nonsensical when he doesn't have his facts straight. So again, this is not at all a shot at Below the Belt or Schaub or anything like that. I very much enjoy the show. If anything, I want this to be a little bit more of a compliment to the show. I want people to check this out after they watch his show and just see where he may have gotten some facts twisted or wrong. And I want to just right those wrongs for him. So hopefully this picks up a little bit of traction. I got the studio set up, as you guys already know, and I'm just looking for more content to put out there for you guys, and this is just something that I enjoy doing. So let me be a little bit of a keener here and try to fact check my dude. So this first installment is going to be going over episode 161 of Below the Belt. I'll have the link and all that stuff in the description below, so you guys can check out the episode if you haven't already. I'm sure you guys have if you guys are checking this out. But let's just start off at the top. So one thing that he talked about when he was talking about the whole Cowboy Cerrone and Conor McGregor fight that just recently got announced, he said that it's a lot tougher to finish Cowboy at 170 pounds than it would be at 155. I don't necessarily agree with that, but in terms of facts to back this up, Jorge Masvidal and Darren Till both were able to finish able to finish Donald Cerrone at 170 pounds. And during Cerrone's 170-pound ventures in the UFC, he's been knocked down a total of 4 times. So, decent record out of 170 pounds, but he definitely has faced adversity at 170 pounds. And I think that Conor has the power to continue for Cerrone to face that adversity. Next up, Conor is not that... He doesn't think that Conor should be that big of a favorite at 170 pounds. They didn't have the odds currently in front of them, but as of this recording, Conor's currently sitting at minus 230, while the return on Donald Cerrone is plus 190. Cowboys title shot. He keeps referring to the fight as Cowboys title shot. I know he's meaning it as a metaphorical thing, but just so you guys know, it's not really a title shot, but it's more so a red panty night, if you want to call it that, like the term that Conor McGregor has made famous. But it's more so Cowboys jackpot. You know what I mean? Anybody who fights Conor is going to get a big payday, so that's kind of what he means by Cowboys title shot. He said Cowboy fought Darren Till in Liverpool. That is incorrect. He fought him in Gdansk, Poland. He said Cowboy fought Leon Edwards in England. That is also incorrect. He fought him in Singapore. He did state that a lot of people don't think that Conor won the second Nate fight. Schaub doesn't think that Nate won that fight either, so he's on the side that Conor did win that. And I'd like to go refer to my guys at MMA Decisions. Through 1,900 fan votes, 46.9% of people believed Conor won that fight 48-47, and then 13.9% believed Diaz won that fight 48-47. So I'd say, more people definitely thought that Conor won that fight. And it's not that big of a debate, in my opinion, at least, in terms of the facts that we have in front of us as well. He touched a little bit about Conor's sexual assault cases. He has 2 of them ongoing currently. They're all still being investigated, so no real firm date set in terms of a progression of it. And he just actually, November 1st, so about a month ago, he accepted a 1,000 euro fine for the pub incident where he punched some guy at a pub, after the guy turned down a proper 12 whiskey shot. And we all know the video and we all seen that, but that's the latest run-in that Conor's had with the authorities. He said that Ronda was tough to sell after 2 MMA losses. That is correct in the MMA world, but just so you guys know, if you guys have been living under a rock, Ronda did very well in the WWE, and I'm pretty sure she made a good chunk of change, as well as brought a lot of eyeballs to the WWE screens as well. So she wasn't completely her value wasn't completely shot, even though she lost 2 straight fights in MMA. She was still able to sell herself in WWE. But again, I know we're talking about MMA. I just felt like that was necessary to put in. UFC 246 co-main event situation. He thinks that it's going to be Nick Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal. There's nothing set in stone right now. Currently, it's looking like the biggest name fight on that card that's been announced is Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. It would kind of be sad if that's the fight that turns out to be the co-main event. However, there are only 9 fights that are currently announced, which leaves roughly about 3 more fights to be announced. But we're running really short on time. Today is December 3rd. The fight's on January 18th. You very rarely ever see fights get announced 4 weeks in advance, 5 weeks in advance. So if it's going to be Nick Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, they must be getting paid a shit ton of money. But also, it is already a big deal if you're on a Conor McGregor card itself. So I would love for it to be Nick Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal, but there is nothing concrete, or at least anything from any credible sources stating that that's actually going to be the co-main event of that event. He hinted at Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. He may know something on the insides or the inner workings of these things, but in terms of this, as of this recording, there is nothing official regarding Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. I wouldn't be mad if they made that fight, but as of right now, nothing concrete, nothing real about that fight being made. Romero, he was saying that a lot of people thought that Romero won the Costa fight. According to MMA decisions, there was 928 people that submitted a score. 49.4% people thought that Costa won the fight. 29-28. 39.5% believe 29-28 Romero. So it is a little bit more splitly decided, at least compared to the Conor and Nate 2 decision. So he does have a little bit of an argument there in terms of that fight being tightly contested. Moving on to John Jones now. So, Schaub just kept pointing at the fact that he's had such big, huge marquee main event fights in his past that he hasn't really had anything to get up for or eat his dinner. He's just playing with his food right now. He's waiting for that main course. And I just wanted to quickly touch on like the biggest pay-per-view buy rates that John Jones has done in his career. Obviously, with the ESPN Plus era in front of us, we are definitely never going to see pay-per-view numbers brought to the forefront and brought to the media. So we're going to have to go off of pre-ESPN Plus era. So John Jones has had 2 fights in the ESPN Plus era this year. But before that, UFC 232, he did 700,000 buys. Coincidentally enough, UFC 145, when he fought Rashard Evans, he did 700,000 buys as well. UFC 182, which was his first fight with Daniel Cormier, did 800,000 buys. And then his rematch, which is the most to date, at least documented, the rematch with Daniel Cormier, UFC 214, did 860,000 buys. So, I was looking through the rest of his fights and they were lingering around the lower 400s to 300,000 range. So it's true, he has seen some big marquee fights, but it obviously depends on what his opposition looks like, which will in turn bring the pay-per-view buys. So you got to assume, his fights with Anthony Smith this year, Thiago Santos, and probably Dominic Reyes is probably going to do closer to the 300 to 400,000 range. But unfortunately, as fans, we'll never get to find out because the UFC is never going to let those numbers out. Last time that John Jones was in jeopardy of losing, for some reason, Schaub was completely forgetting about the fact that he just went to a very razor-thin close decision fight against Thiago Santos last. He was like scratching his head trying to figure out the last time that he was in jeopardy of losing, and it was his last fight. He just didn't show up, and he, never really pushed for to get the victory there. And a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, is this going to be the night that fucking John Jones loses?" Right before that judge's decision was declared. So, MMA decisions: 1,170 votes, 49.5% of people voted that Thiago Santos won that fight, 48-47. 30.1% of people had it 48-47 John Jones. I'd say that's close. I don't know how you can forget about how close that fight was, but that was a split decision victory for John Jones that he probably should have lost. And then they were talking about the DC fight. I think Nick, or his producer, again, I can't remember his name, brought up the fact that, John Jones was losing that fight going into the 3rd round. The official scores from the judges Two judges had it 19-19 going into that third round, and then one judge actually had it 20-18 for John Jones going into that third round. So no real factual, evidence to state that DC was actually winning that fight before he got knocked out. If anything, it was a tie. They brought up that Daniel Cormier was a team captain for the U.S. Olympic team. He was. In 2008, he was a team captain, yet that was actually the year he was pulled from competition due to weight-cutting complications. I think it was kidney stones that he had to deal with. But yes, that is correct. He was a team captain for Team USA. Moving on to the Khabib and Ferguson event, or the fact that they announced that fight for UFC 248 in April. I just want to quickly run down that for fans who have only been around for the last two or so years. This fight's been trying to get booked since December 11th of 2015. They were supposed to fight at the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale, but Khabib pulled out due to an injury. UFC on Fox 19, which was April 16th, 2016. They're supposed to fight for a second time, or they were scheduled to fight for a second time. Ferguson pulls out due to a lung issue, if I'm not mistaken. He had water in his lungs or something. UFC 209, March 4th, 2017. That was the third time they were booked to fight. Khabib pulls out due to weight cutting. I believe that was actually on the weigh-in day he pulled out, so that was pretty tough to deal with. And then UFC 223, the last time they were scheduled to fight each other. This was the fourth time. April 7th, 2018, Ferguson pulls out due to tripping on a wire while trying to complete his media obligations on Fight Week in Brooklyn. I believe it was Brooklyn that this fight took place in. Insane that it happened that way. But yeah, he tripped over some wires and tore his knee, and that, further pushed this fight. And now we're finally getting it, hopefully, fingers crossed, UFC 248, April 18th, 2020. So keep your fingers crossed, do what you guys got to do, pray to whatever God you do, and let's hope that fight actually happens this time around. All right, we got four more things to run down. Schaub kept saying that the fight is happening in New York City. I know, and I'm sure as most listeners know, he was talking about New York State, but he's actually fighting that fight is actually taking place in Brooklyn, New York, not New York City. Let's get that straight. New York State Athletic Commission, he kept ragging on the fact that this New York State Athletic Commission was having issues in terms of being, one of the more harder commissions to work with. A couple of things that they had to deal with. The Nate Diaz cut from the Jorge Masvidal fight that just happened last month. Numerous weight cut issue gaffes in terms of, Towelgate, and then Rafael Cordero Gate. We all know about that. And then one of the more bizarre ones was pulling Jessica Aguilar the morning of her fight due to a cold sore on her lip. One of the weirder stories that you'll hear for the New York State Athletic Commission, and also considering the fact that they've only been allowed to have events in the New York state since 2017. 2016. So it's only been 3 years, just under 3 years since they've been actually, legalized it to have that fight or have MMA fights in the state of New York. But yeah, there is a little bit of sketchiness whenever you have a UFC event in that state. All right. He talked about Canelo's crazy, outrageous contract that he received from DAZN. If you guys don't know, it was an 11-fight deal over 5 years where he would get paid a total of $365 million. That's an insane number. Very surprised that he was able to nab that, but he's the biggest name in boxing, so I don't doubt, the reasons as to why DAZN offered that contract to him. And then lastly, they talked about why there is such a big lull between the Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie card, which I believe is December 21st, and the Conor McGregor card, which is January 28th. He said it's because of Conor. They want to give the UFC fans something to wait for and build up towards. And that's just not true. I believe they just had that already in their schedule. They only made the January 18th card just because of Conor. And it was actually supposed to be January 25th. That was supposed to be the first event of 2020. However, Conor decided to fight, and they made an event based around him anyway. So if it wasn't for Conor, we would be waiting over a month for another UFC event after the Korea card that's coming up at December 21st. So that's pretty much the fact check for for BTB episode 161. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Wanted to make it as quick as possible, and hopefully I can continue doing this every week. I actually enjoyed it. It was fun. Again, not trying to shit on Schaub or anybody at the BTB crew. Just trying to help you guys and compliment you guys, and just get a little of these facts a little bit more straightened out for the listeners, so they're not misled or don't think that certain things happened when they didn't. Yeah, that's episode 1, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 2.